continuing our conversation with World War II veterans. And I am very happy to have another veteran that I've known most all of my life, and that is John Barber. John, how are you?
Fine.
Good.
Good to be here.
And I'm glad you're here.
Yeah.
You and I have known each other a long time. You've got a lot of history in Davie County.
Correct.
In fact, you're one of the first county managers, if not
First county manager in 1970.
1970.
That's right.
Now,
Well, your dad was with me too on that first board.
he was.
That's
Right. John, we're going to go straight to just before the war started, 1940. Let's go to that year. What was happening in your life?
In my life?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in 1940, I was just finishing up carrying papers for the Journal and Sentinel.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, that was 6 papers, days, morning and evening in the Sunday paper, and 35 cents a week. That's what we paid for that paper.
35 cents a week.
A week.
So what happened? Did you go to the mailbox one day and find a letter from Uncle Sam saying, we'd like to have you?
Well, I was too young now, Kyle, at that time.
Mm-hmm.
In 1941, my brother and I were 16 years old.
You had a twin brother.
That's right.
What was his name?
Worth Henley Barber.
Worth Henley Barber.
Right.
Okay, so twin brother, 16 years old.
Right.
All right.
And I'll never forget when we heard the news about the Japanese attacking Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, daggone, Worth, you realize that Dad missed World War II? World War I, and we're going to miss World War II because the Marines are going over there and clean up everything in about a month's time.
Mm-hmm.
Little did I know. But I'll never forget making that statement.
So it was a much bigger event than you anticipated.
That's correct.
And I think it was for a lot of Americans. So I guess in 1943, you were 18.
That's correct.
Is that the point that you got your invitation to come?
Well, I was a senior at Reynolds High School
Mm-hmm.
in 1943. Of course, this is back when we had the graduation in June that year.
Mm-hmm.
But and that senior year, this commander from the Navy came to Reynolds High School, and he wanted to talk to any of the boys that were interested flying for the Navy. Well, my brother and I jumped at that opportunity to fly with the Navy. But and this commander worked with us for 3 days and 3 nights trying to get us to pass the eye test.
Mm-hmm.
We had passed all the other requirements of mental tests, so forth, and but we couldn't pass that Navy requirements. And you know, when you're landing on aircraft carriers, you got to be good. And I'm sure the good Lord was looking after us. But to make a long story short, we couldn't pass because we had stigmatism in our left eye. We didn't know it because we thought we had 20/20 vision.
Mm-hmm.
And so that knocked us out of that Navy that we were interested in. So Worth and I decided to go ahead and volunteer for the draft. If anything happened, you know, that we would not be accepted, of course we were not looking for that, but that we, you know, could go off to NC State, #1 college in North Carolina. And so we volunteered for the draft. I never will forget it. 79 boys left Winston-Salem. Now we had to go to Camp Cross down in Spartanburg, South Carolina first for our physical. And I never will forget that because I knew I had a left leg. I had an infection when I was a baby, and about, I guess, 8 months old. They had to put me in the hospital down there in Charlotte. Didn't have any of these modern medicines and all, but anyhow, the doctor took care of me, but this left leg was a little bit shorter, a little bit weaker than the other. And I just said a prayer, please don't let me get caught down there in this, when they were checking us down at Camp Crawl. There were 10 of us in a line, and there were 2 medical doctors at a desk there in front of us. I happened to be on the end of this line of, we didn't have a stitch of clothes on.
I've heard that today.
But the one thing, when I had to fall down on my knees and get up without using my hands, I had to use my hands, but luckily those doctors didn't see it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was the happiest boy in the world going back to Winston-Salem on the bus that I'd been past everything down there at Camp Crawl.
So you and Worth both went down there together?
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
We were down there together. He was right beside me.
Mm-hmm.
And so about 3 weeks after that, 79 boys from Winston-Salem went to Fort Jackson. And of course, we took the tests and the physicals and everything that they required. They picked 10 boys to go into the Army Air Corps Cadet program. And so we were really excited about that, you know, the 10 out of 79. So we called home, and went a couple of days after that's when they said we were shipping out. And Mother and Dad said, well, where are you going? We said, oh, Texas or California. Ended up in Greensboro, North Carolina. TC number 10.
Mm-hmm.
And for basic training.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad, who was a railroad conductor, he was bringing a fast, he was running between Winston-Salem and Greensboro. He made 2 trips during the day,
mm-hmm.
all in pastures back in that time. But anyhow, we were quarantined for 3 weeks. But that's where we took basic training. When we ended our basic training, they loaded us up on Pullman cars. And when we left Greensboro, I said, Worth, you know where we're going? He said, I'm thinking just like you. We're going to leave out of here. We're going to go through Advance. We're going to get to Knoxville. We're going to hit Barber Junction. Yeah, Barber Junction was named after my grandfather. He had a hotel down there. And, and when we got this is an interesting story. When our train got to Barber Junction, and of course, we were both very familiar about the rails and how the trains left Barber. And my Aunt Ethel and Uncle Shell's home was close to the tracks. And Worth and I hollered off to Aunt Ethel and let all the kinfolks know we're here. And so all of these people came, and she said, anything you've got on the stove, said, bring it down. Those boys will want it. What we did, they pulled in the Y to head. You had to go over here on the main line to Asheville. And I knew we were going to go to Asheville the way the train went by on this, what we call the Y. And then it backed down into the station. Mm-hmm. Well, when it backed down the station, all of these people were out there and had sausage biscuits and had pie and cookies and everything. Well, the train commander went wild. He said, how did all these people know you were coming through here? We said, sir, we didn't know that till we got here. I'll tell you one other funny thing. My dad had a friend who was at Lockburn Army Air Base, which was at Columbus, Ohio, right there in the same city, who was a major. And Dad called him, and Mother and Dad had come up to visit us. And the major invited all of us, Worth and I and Mother and Dad, to the Officers Club for dinner on Sunday. Mm-hmm. And while we was there eating, he asked Worth and I, said, have you boys ever been up? We said, no, never been off the ground. He said, would you like to go up on a B-17? Yes, sir. So after we had eaten lunch, he took us out there on the line, and the B-17s were taking off and landing, you know, doing their practices. And so he commandeered one of those B-17, put Worth and I on there. And I guess we were on that B-17 about an hour. And so that was the first plane we ever went up.
I bet that was exciting.
At the end of our 6-month educational time there at Capitol University, the commanding officer called me in. I was one of the student officers there. And he said, "John, I've got bad news." He said, "I didn't realize you and your brother didn't join the Army Air Corps cadets volunteered from civilian life." I said, "No, sir. We were selected at Fort Jackson, 10 of us." And he said, "Well, we got a problem." They put out a directive that every cadet, because, see, this was in the spring of 1944, like February. And he said they've decided they've got plenty of pilots, bombardiers, and navigators. So any boy that didn't volunteer from civilian life is going to have to go back to the old unit. Well, I told him, I said, "We've never been assigned to anything else." He said, "Well, you're going to gunnery school." And he said, "I'm going to put you in charge of 13 of you going to Kingman, Arizona." So that's where we ended up in gunnery school. And we were training on B-17, by the way, there too. But one day, about the end of our session there, I was flying at high altitude, and my electric heated suit went out. And when I left the ground there, the temperature was about 103, and these were the old-fashioned electric suits, looked like underwear. And of course, I was sweating when I got in that airplane. Then when it went out up there where it was about 30 below zero, I came down with a strep throat. I'd never had a strep throat before and never had one since. While I was in the hospital, they gave the final exam. And my twin brother, and he's good, I mean, at taking tests, but he made 80, and he was real pleased with it. So when they let me out of the hospital after 3 days, I said, "Worth, bring me up to date on that test. I've got to take it." "You're not taking it." I said, "What do you mean?" "When they call you to go to take it, I'm going." We were identical twins, you know. And I said,
I guess there's a convenience there.
Well, I'm glad. Boy, if you're ready to take that, he made 100 on that test for me.
So you were the smart one.
That's a true story.
That is funny.
So we left Kingman and went to Lincoln, Nebraska, and that's where they formed the crews together. You know, the officers and the enlisted men, and they called out my brother and also me for B-24s. I said, B-24s, because I'd kind of fallen in love with that B-17. It's kind of like the glamour boy of World War II, you know. But anyhow, and I got a good crew because my pilot's last name was Huxameyer. He was a good German, and he was one excellent pilot. And but anyhow, we left there. Worth had his crew, and of course my crew left at the same time. And we went out to Mountain Home, Idaho. And Mountain Home, Idaho was really a beautiful area, and I never will forget, one of the worst times of my life is the pilot said, "Hey, if you look out across, look at out 9 o'clock. Said, "You see that fire out there? One of the B-24s crashed." And I said, "What was the number?" And they said 66. And I knew my brother was on that plane. And I said, Huck was my pilot's first name. I said, "Huck, can the tower give us any other information?" And he said, "I'll check right now." And he called. He said, "They know 7 chutes came out." Well, I felt a little better then. My brother was a nose gunner on that plane, because I felt like all of the gunners at least bailed out. Maybe the pilot, co-pilot, and engineer would, you know, stay in with the plane a little bit longer. But anyhow, when we landed, my pilot said, "John, come with me. We're going to go over to the tower and talk to him again." And so we went over there, and they had an ambulance that several that had gone out. And they had picked up 9 of the boys. We had a 10-man crew. And the tail gunner was still missing. And of course, the boys were all kind of joking, and by that time, and said, "Oh, he went into town to get a beer." So, but anyhow, the very next day, of course, the Army Air Corps located the body of the tail gunner. He just failed to jump until it was too late. And in fact, Worth went out to camera hatch, and Worth said to Dieterman, who was the boy from Missouri, that Dieter said, "Well, you go first. I'll be right behind you." And of course, that's the last time Worth saw him. Mm. But anyhow, we graduated, our crews did there at Mountain Home, Idaho, and we went to pick up our B-24s at brand new ones. Boy, I'll tell you, they were slick. Kansas City, Missouri. I never will forget. And of course, our time there, we spent about 3 weeks. Of course, there was a lot more work on, I'm sure, the pilot, co-pilot, navigator, and bombardier. Mm-hmm. But we had all become like brothers by this time. And me and the ball turret, and all ball turrets, you can look at all of the planes in the sky around you. We put our guns straight down because the fighters didn't come in, because they were really giving us anti-aircraft fire left and right. And those German 88s, the most efficient weapon in the world as far as, and I'm talking about tank warfare or shooting down planes. And they would always tell us in briefing, when we'd go to briefing and find out where the mission was going to be, that, you know, they would kid us a little bit. They said, "Well, you know, you're going to Vienna today, and Vienna's got more anti-aircraft guns than any target you're going to face." And I said, "That doesn't sound good." Yeah, that's right.
Now, was Worth in that same plane with you?
No.
He was in another plane.
He was in another plane and another squadron, but we were only about a mile apart. Mm-hmm. And but anyhow, Worth was in the nose turret, mm-hmm. and so he could watch my plane carefully. Mm-hmm. And of course, he had said he pushed up because we were wearing helmets. Mm-hmm. And all. Push his helmet up, see if my plane was still there, and pull it back down. Mm-hmm. The first mission that we went on happened to be the worst mission that I ever flew. And the reason, the target was Vienna. And we had a German shell now from one of these 88 artillery. That shell passed through the part of our tail section without exploding. I mean, you're talking about the good Lord looking at you. Mm. I mean, he looked at it. It didn't, you know, break any of the wiring or the cables. The piece of shrapnel came in through the right side and went out through the left side. Didn't hit me, thank goodness. Mm-hmm. But it got my attention. And we threw tinsel out to, you know, to disrupt the
radar.
That's exactly right. That could be fired. I know these are so-called practice right now, but I think it's so important that that all of our citizens, and especially our students that are in school, learn as much as they can about what happened between 1941 and 1945. That was the thousands and thousands and thousands of lives that were lost in defending our country, and that I'll say this, that, and I know we're talking about World War II now, but my brother did give his life in another war that I'm not going to discuss at this time. Maybe I'm still around when they start discussing the Korean War.
I feel that it's obvious that you carry your brother with you every day of your life.
Every day.
And I can tell that the tribute that you're making right now about your experience in World War II is not about John, it's about John and Worth.
Yeah.
And I value that, and I think the people that are listening through this videotape can value that. I want to thank you for coming out and sharing part of your story about World War II